Okay, good morning, folks. Hope you're all well. You are all very welcome to this morning's webinar. The sun is shining in Dublin, so you might pop a good morning actually into the comment, into the chat function there, just to let me know you can hear me okay. Let us know what the weather is like. Lots of interest in this morning's webinar, which is great. All about how we enhance the employee experience through internal communications. And I'm conscious we've a mix of organizations on the call today. Some are on the Great Place to Work program, some are interested, but maybe just to kind of bring everyone to the same sort of piece. Like at the heart of being a great workplace, it's all about building a high trust workplace. It's all about improving your culture over time. It's not about the nice shiny offices, the free perks, the nice food, the unlimited holidays. It's not about that at all. And the way you actually build trust is by focusing on those core foundation areas, some basic areas in terms of culture, of which communication is a critical area in terms of building trust and being a great place to work. And over the last year, what a year it's been, right? We've all experienced more disconnection than ever before. Like many of you, I haven't seen my team since the first week of March last year, which is crazy when you think about it. But at a time when we're all experiencing this disconnection, I think the challenge for a lot of us is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we create more connection? And a key way we can do that is through a focused approach around internal communication. A focused approach around internal communication can be critical in terms of building that all-important connection with our teams, with our employees. And we've two excellent speakers lined up today. I'll introduce the speakers now in a minute, but for everyone, if you could please pop your questions into the chat function. We want to hear your questions, but we also want to hear, what are you doing in communication that you're quite proud of? Let us know what that is as well. That would be great to see. So just on the next slide here, we have launched our podcast. It's called The Red Cube, and that podcast will cover all things workplace culture. So wherever you get your podcasts, we'd be delighted if you could go on to subscribe to the Red Cube podcast, digest the content, and let us know what you think. And we also have a ebook around takeaway practices in terms of communication, and we'll send out a follow-on where you can get a link to that ebook, and it's also on our website as well. So lots of content for you to digest. We want this to be as much of a conversation as possible. Pop your questions in, let us know what you're doing on communication. So first up, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Eva Mahon, who is the Talent and Development Partner from Kuehne Nagel. Eva is responsible for implementing the Talent and Development Strategy across Ireland. And for those who don't know, Kuehne Nagel have been consistently a great place to work over a number of years, which means they've consistently been a high trust culture. They have consistently worked on improving their workplace culture. And they're a global leader in the freight and logistics business. And they recently won a special award back in March for internal communications, which I'm sure we'll hear all about on the presentation and a lot more. So thanks to everyone for joining us. And Eva, delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and you might just let me know you can see that okay?
That is great, Eva. We can just flick it onto slideshow mode. That's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So look, thank you so much for having me here. I'm absolutely delighted to join this conversation today, and particularly around communication. I mean, it's so important, and it's always been at the forefront of our people agenda, certainly within Kuehne Nagel. And I'm delighted to share our initiative today around our careers radio show called KNFM, and how we launched that last year. So in 2016, we decided we wanted to create a Careers Day event. And what we wanted to do was really highlight the internal career opportunities available within KN, highlight the various roles and various areas within the business, and take the opportunity as well to showcase our development suite and our career path model, and really the support functions and the tools that were there to support our employees in terms of shaping and carving out their own career path. So we reached out to the business, we sought feedback on what they wanted to hear. We asked them, what roles are you interested in learning more about? What areas of the business are you interested in learning more about? Who are you interested in hearing from? Do you want to have a Q&A with the senior management team in terms of their own career development and their own career path and their career journey? And from that feedback, we created a workshop style event where we, I suppose, designed it to highlight those internal career opportunities and those various areas of business. So, giving people in the operational side of the business exposure to the commercial side. We had key account managers give a talk around, a day in the life of their role. And we had a lot of kind of members of our senior management team open up to Q&As around their own career journeys as well. And we also ran training bites and kind of lunch and learns throughout the day to give people exposure to some of the development programs we had coming up and what they felt like. So we ran this format for kind of 2 years, and in 2018, we felt we'd kind of run that format through its course, and we wanted to evolve it a bit. And we kind of wanted to evolve the conversation. We felt everyone within the organisation understood the roles within the business, understood the career opportunities. So we really wanted to highlight or get into the detail of what really shapes somebody's career. So we decided to create a TED Talk style event, where we went out to the business and approached people within the organisation that we felt had a particular story to share that our employees could learn from and really develop their own careers. So we looked at areas such as resilience and bouncing back. We had a great one around Find Your Dumbledore, which is around mentoring, where one of the girls had connected the mentor relationship between Harry Potter and Dumbledore and her own mentoring experience within the business and how that shaped her career. We talked about, the importance of, was it attitude versus aptitude, and what was really important in terms of your career development. And we had a fantastic day. We took the TED Talk event on the road. We visited each of our branch. We delivered it live. We actually brought in Michael Common to run a training workshop with all of our speakers to go through how to deliver a TED Talk. We very much wanted them to be, telling stories. We didn't want anyone up there kind of death by PowerPoint for the entire day. And we wanted to give them the space and the freedom to be really honest about their career journeys as well. And we had phenomenal feedback from it. We had employees come up to our speakers at the end of the day and say, God, that really resonated with me. I'm in that headspace now, or I've gone through that period of time, and I'd love if we could meet for a coffee and I could pick your brain and you could give me some advice on, how you progress within this space. So we had really fantastic feedback from it. Then in 2019, we decided to evolve it again because we are continuously evolving and never wants to rest on our laurels. So we created the Careers Talk Show. So we really went all out with this, and we turned our training room into a television studio. So we brought in, a stage, a camera crew, lighting. We had a big backdrop of a brick wall and our Careers Talk Show backdrop. And we invited a number of panelists to come and talk about various topics that we felt, again, were important to our employees and our teams within the business. There's certainly, I think, a second career option for our NM as a chat show host. She was absolutely fantastic on the day. And the topics that they covered were, things like women in business, parents in business and how they manage that. We had some of our apprentices share their journeys as coming into the organisation as apprentices and going through the apprenticeship. We had some of our guys have gone through some of our key talent programs, their experience and how it shaped their careers. And some of our, director levels just talking about, their career journeys to date. And again, a really, really phenomenal uptake on it. The room, we had people standing out in the corridor trying to get in. We filmed it all and we shared it live with everyone as well, so that everybody could avail of all of the workshops and get involved. And it was really, really fantastic event. People were asking questions and really interested in people's stories and what they had to share. So then we hit 2020, or rather, I think 2020 hit us would probably be more apt. And we wanted to continue. I mean, it was more important for us than ever to have that connection piece with the organisation and continue our Careers Day event. But we were faced, I suppose, with a whole new challenge, not only around, how we could roll it out, but how we could bring everybody together safely and in the right way. So we have settled on a radio show. So I suppose our first consideration was, how do we bring everybody together? We knew everyone was, going through a bit of Zoom fatigue at this stage. I mean, the CEO of Zoom has come out to say he's sick of Zoom. So we knew that was definitely an element for people where, it's an exhausting day to be sitting in front of Zoom for an entire day. So we considered, how can we reach people? How can they all get involved? But it's not going to impact, their working day or overly impact that Zoom fatigue that everyone was suffering from at the time. So we decided that a radio show was the best approach. The logic was you'd have the radio on in the background while you're working away. It wasn't something you had to watch. You could tune in for various shows that you were interested in, and we'd have music segments and competitions and all the rest of the kind of fun stuff that goes with a radio station. So this was our backdrop. We held this up the whole time, kind of highlighting, what segment was coming next, what was on. We had a competition hotline, so we ran competitions throughout the day, and we also used this hotline for people to text in and ask questions from our speakers, to text in and request songs. We had people texting in to, wish their colleagues happy birthdays and everything. It really did evolve and turn into a radio station. And we used the chat function as well in terms of driving that engagement. So I'll get a little bit more into that detail further on. In terms of running the radio show, we knew it was a bit different to the events we'd run before. We really had to plan each minute and each second of the day. I'm sure everyone's had experience, with Zoom calls when someone's not sure when to talk or cut in, or there's those moments when it lags. So it was really important that it flowed really naturally for us. And we had every eventuality, I suppose, planned for. So we really planned each minute and second of the day. We had our two hosts, which was our NM and our HR director, who kind of led everybody through those particular segments. And then myself and my colleague were our producers in the background. So we were kind of running the show in the background. It was it really was like running a radio show. We'd be saying, 20 seconds to live, 10 seconds to live, mute mic, don't unmute your mic, and who we're bringing on next, if anybody had a particular conversation that we wanted to raise. So we had all of that going on in the background as well throughout the entire day. But it was really important for us that we had planned it to a T in advance. We had buffer songs if we needed them. We had buffer segments if we needed them. We had people we could bring in who were kind of prepared to come in and share stories if we were running under time or we're struggling with a particular segment. This is really important that it was planned down to a T. We did want it to feel like that radio station. So we took our inspiration from the radio. We had our breakfast show. We had phone-in shows. We ran competitions throughout the day. So we ran, Guess That Sound, where we recorded sounds. We had a film competition we ran where you had to guess what the film was through the various songs. As the resident DJ, I think I did lose people slightly when I played Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On. But it was just great fun. Everyone was, commenting in the chat function and getting involved through WhatsApp throughout the entire day. And we really wanted to drive that engagement piece for us. We didn't want it to be a passive show that people were just listening into. We really wanted it to be an opportunity for us all to come together, to reconnect as an organization. And we did that through, using the chat function, the WhatsApp function, song requests, questions for the speakers, and continuously getting people involved. And our engagement levels didn't drop below 90% for the entire day. We had employees who were in Brazil at the time who tuned in. We had people who were off on annual leave who tuned in. And it really was an incredible uptake and something that people were really, really excited for. And it became very evident to us that they were hungry for that connection. The feedback we got off it was absolutely phenomenal in terms of people saying afterwards, we'd get emails to say, I didn't realize how kind of isolated I'd felt over the last couple of weeks until we had that day. And it was just amazing to reconnect with our colleagues. And I mean, the feedback was so phenomenal that we actually were requested to come back and do a Christmas radio show as well, which again was great fun. We had Santa call in live from the North Pole and speak to some of our team's kids on air, and we had great fun with our Christmas playlist. So I'd like to get into, I suppose, a bit of detail and share around what our topics were and kind of how we ran the day, I suppose. So this was our career show program. So we kicked off with a breakfast show to kind of highlight, I suppose, what the day would look like, what people could expect, how people could get involved, and introduce our various segments throughout the day as well. Our first one was around Own Your Career. And for each of these segments, we reached out to people within the organisation that we felt had a story to share within that space. So we had some of our colleagues who we felt were really smart in this space to share their advice and share, I suppose, their own career journeys and what they've done to really own and take charge of their own career development. We had a spotlight on contract logistics and the various roles within that and the various aspects of it within our business and through customer solutions. We also used the opportunity, I suppose, to highlight some of our other communication aspects. So we have National Employee Recognition Awards called the NERAs. And we were running, I suppose, our final NERA session the following week, and we wanted to use this day as well to kind of build momentum from that. So we had our NERA shortlists where we would read out all of our shortlist categories that have come through across our 3 kind of key topics around customer, people, and technology. And again, great feedback through that. We had some employees saying, they felt really emotional listening to their name being called out over the radio and shared with all their colleagues, and seeing everybody, comment on it in the chat function and congratulate them and really getting involved. And we had 2 segments around Zoom zombies. As I mentioned, we're very aware of, I suppose, the Zoom fatigue. And while it's a fantastic tool and when you use it in the right way, it can also be quite a tiring tool or can really eat up into your day when all of your meetings are taking place over Zoom. So we shared stories and advice around kind of how to really utilize it in a smart way. And got really smart about our time. And we did have some people share some of their Zoom horror stories, which were great fun. We had wise words around people kind of sharing their best career advice they've ever gotten. We had balance and belonging and what that meant for us within the organisation and as a strategy. We had our phone-in show around the future of work. So again, really opening up the conversation to everybody. What do you see the future of work looking like? Having been in this flexible or in this remote situation for the last number of months, how would you like to see the working way evolve? Would you be interested in a flexible working way going forward? Would you be interested in remote, or are you excited to get back to the office? And really get an understanding of where people were at in terms of that space. Our afternoon debate then was around the career ladder. So really looking at, is the only way up, the kind of old school way of just climbing up each role through a career ladder. And really looking at the aspects of, is there multimodal experience? Are there more kind of sideways moves that make more sense in terms of rounding out your career and your knowledge within the business? And then we had on the inside, which was looking at our implants and our OCAMs, so our operational key account managers that actually work on site with some of our customers, sharing their experience around, what it's like to not only be integrated into Kuehne Nagel and part of our organization, but also to be integrated into this other organization or our customer and what that was like day to day. And we also had our big drive home, where we looked at tips and advice around how to kind of close out the day when you're working from home. That remote aspect of tips and tricks for walking away from your laptop or your computer when maybe you're walking from the desk to the couch or from one room to another. And some advice around how we can really drive that work-life balance for everybody. We were absolutely delighted to win the Workvivo internal communication awards. It really was for us the icing on the cake. But really, what was so fantastic about this event for us, and honestly, I think it's been my favourite day since joining Kuehne Nagel a number of years ago. It's something I always look forward to. But this really was one of the most enjoyable events, was the impact of it. It really did go above and beyond in terms of exceeding our expectations. We really wanted to bring everybody together in a really smart way, in an enjoyable way, and to cover those important topics that we really wanted to drive in terms of that career development agenda. But in terms of that connection piece, it really exceeded our expectations. We had employees sending us videos of them dancing around their kitchen to the music. We had, as I mentioned, we didn't drop below 90% engagement. We had people texting in, saying how great it was to reconnect with everybody, how important it had been as a day. We had people who wanted to join for one segment and said they couldn't turn it off. They listened to the whole thing. And we really did have pretty much full listenership for the entire day. It really didn't drop for us, which was absolutely phenomenal, and again exceeded our expectations. I think the biggest thing that jumped out at us was around that isolation piece, where people felt that kind of loss of connection with the colleagues, where it was a space where everyone could come together but also have a bit of crack, have a laugh. I'm sure my neighbours thought I was insane, cackling away throughout the day at all of the all of the jokes and comments coming through in terms of the chat function. and everyone just having a bit of banter with each other as well throughout it. But it really was just a phenomenal day for us to reconnect and come together, to take time to appreciate the year that we'd had and the time that we were in and the challenges. It had been an incredibly busy period for us as an organization as well. So really to take that time to thank everybody and bring everybody together and recognize that. And I mean, it was such an emotional moment. Like, we had our NM she was giving out the competition winners prizes at the end of the day, and one of them was an additional day's annual leave. And she was so caught up in the moment that she went full Ryan Tubridy on us, and at the end of it said, you know what, there's one for everybody in the audience, and gave everyone a day's annual leave. And you know, that wasn't something that we had planned in advance, but it was just something that felt right in the moment, when we had all come together and all reconnected and all acknowledged the year and the challenge and everything that we'd gone through. So that was phenomenal in itself. And as you can imagine, we couldn't keep up with the chat function after that in terms of all the delight and thank yous from that regard. But yeah, it was really a phenomenal day for us. In terms of next year, I mean, we've evolved it every year. I honestly don't know where we're going to bring it from last year, but I'm really excited to continue it and evolve it further, and really drive this communication piece. I mean, as I mentioned, we've already built on it in terms of our Christmas show last year, and it's really been a focus for us this year in terms of how we can reconnect with everybody and continue that connection, because it's so important as an organization to make sure that we are still connecting. And particularly, we've had a number of new employees join the organization, and on board into an organization in a very weird time, and it's really how we can bring everybody together and integrate everyone in the right way as well, and whilst also covering obviously our really important topics that we feel will really help to drive career development and internal opportunities within Kuehne Nagel. So thank you very much. I was absolutely delighted to share that story with you. I would love to answer any and all questions if anybody has any. And I'm also really interested to hear what everybody else is doing in terms of that communication piece as well. So thank you.
That's great, Eva. Thank you very much. I didn't know we had a DJ on the call. Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On. I'm wondering what happened to the listenership when that song went on. Who knows? Yeah. And the Dumbledore approach as well. But what I love is that it's that confidence to have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah.
We're trying to communicate and land messages, but also have fun with it and to show that evolution of the practice. Sometimes we settle on a thing and that becomes our thing for too long. To show a bit of evolution in terms of the practice is great to see as well. So, Eva, we'll take questions at the end if that's all right, but thank you very much for that. Really, really appreciate it. So, next up, we have John Goulding from Workvivo. John is from Cork, but we can't hold that against him. Workvivo are an internal communication platform that keep employees informed, connected, aligned to your company's culture and values. A number of our clients, a number of great workplaces use the Workvivo platform. They're fans of the platform, such as Taxback, now Clune Technology, Woody's, etc., etc. So it's adding a lot of value to companies out there. And to speak about how you can use internal communication to get that emotional connection, that all-important emotional connection with employees and a lot more, I'm delighted to hand over to you, John. John, thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks, Cathal. I'll acknowledge the Cork mention there. No, first thing I wanted to say was congrats to Eva. It's an amazing story. Like what you've done is very innovative. It feels instinctively right, and there's a lot of things I'll talk about in terms of a framework, a suggested framework for internal comms in terms of influencing emotional connection, influencing the employee experience. But there's a huge amount of what you've done is definitely covered in what I'm going to talk about. And no, congrats. It sounds amazing, and it sounds like it delivered a huge impact. I'm just going to share my screen here. So hopefully, Cathal, you can see that.
We can see that, John. Thank you.
Okay, great. So first thing I would say is employee experience. I'm going to talk about internal communications and how it can influence employee experience. I think the role of internal communications has been massively elevated over the last 12 months in terms of how it can affect and influence employee experience. I'm going to refer to something you mentioned at the start, Cathal, being very focused. I think the role of people in internal comms, anybody who's involved in communicating to the company, you can be more effective if you're very focused, if you've got a framework, if you've got a good sense of being deliberate about certain things and how you communicate and what you communicate. And that's what I'm going to cover, and hopefully it's helpful to people. Before I do, I'm just going to talk about the last 12 months for a second, because I think it's important to set some context, right? So I think, if we look at the last 12 months, the first 6 months post-pandemic, I think there was a lot of, self-congratulations, right? The work from home experiment was amazing. We were never so productive. Everybody was happy with it, or there was a lot of positivity around this work from home. Why didn't we do it sooner? I think if you look at the narrative over the last 6 months, it's a slightly different narrative, right? You hear things like Eva mentioned, fatigue. You hear people are more stressed. There's a little bit of burnout. There's a lot of disengagement. And the reality is, for the first 6 months post-pandemic hitting, we were all working on the social capital that had been built up. Like, the tank was full in terms of the social capital that had been built up in the workplace prior to everybody going remote. I think it's become obvious over the last 6 months that social capital has been depleting. And the challenge for all of us and the challenge for people that work in communications especially is two things, really. How do you build social capital in a remote workplace or in a hybrid workplace? And secondly, how do you not destroy social capital that you have built up, right? Because both are important. You need to be consciously and deliberately avoiding destroying the social capital you've built up. And you also need to be looking to build more social capital where people are not in the office. Just some additional context. We just published in the last week, we published an employee engagement benchmark report. We surveyed over 1,000 employees in the US and in the UK in terms of how the hybrid working model, and some things that will probably resonate with people. 79% of people felt more isolated. 70% of employees felt more burnout at work. 60% of employees felt less connected to their organization's goals, the purpose of their organization, and that's something I'm going to touch on in a little bit as well. That's critically important to acknowledge. Half of people, 1 in 2 employees, felt less belonging at work since going remote. 1 in 2 employees said they love their job less since going remote. Just to talk about belonging for a second, sense of belonging. Prior to the pandemic hitting last year, employees with a poor sense of belonging were 50% more likely to leave their company and 60% less likely to recommend their company. Where this becomes hugely important is, like, we now live in a world where people can leave their current company on a Friday evening, get a new laptop delivered over the weekend, and start with a new company on a Monday morning. They're just clicking on a different Zoom link, right? So the friction to move has been completely eroded. And what, as organizational leaders, what we're relying on is sense of belonging, emotional commitment. It's that belonging that becomes, I suppose, the battleground that you're fighting on to keep employees. I'm not going to get into this report, just wanted to touch on a couple of key things as context setting. If anybody is interested in the report, there's a link where you can download it there, or just email hello@workvivo.com and we get that sent over. For when we talk about employee experience, and Cathal, you touched on this at the start, right? Employee experience has a lot of connotations for people, and we think about employee experience. Sometimes we think about it in terms of perks, right? And it's the in-house chefs, right? And it's the playrooms and the video rooms, and it's that incredible office experience. And for us, that's not how we should be thinking about employee experience. When we think about employee experience, we think about it in terms of what's the desired outcome? What's the objective in terms of if we're trying to build an employee experience, and Eva just touched on it, like an amazing employee experience that they put together. But what's the output? What's the objective? And for us, the objective should all be about the emotional commitment to the organization. Your employee experience, if it's purely focused on ensuring people's emotional commitment to the organization, then you're absolutely doing the right things. The good news is internal communication is a huge influencer of this emotional connection. The one thing that we need to keep in mind, though, is you need to be deliberate. You need to be focused about what are the drivers of this emotional connection, and how can internal communication affect them. So things that I'm going to talk about are all things that very much affect the emotional commitment to the organization through communication. First thing I'm going to talk about is purpose and values. And again, this is a suggested framework, regardless of what technology you use, whether you use technology, it's a framework. When we talk about things like employee engagement is the emotional commitment to the organization and the organization's goals. So your most engaged employees not only believe in the organization, but believe in what the organization is trying to achieve. And we need, as communicators, and leaders in an organization, we need to be constantly joining the dots between what people are doing and the purpose of the organization, the goals of the organization. Everybody wants to feel part of something bigger. And if you feel part of something bigger, it doesn't feel like work. And that's something that we should be considered when you're communicating. We always encourage, for us, when people post on our platform, we give the option of linking things to goals or values or purpose, which brings the values alive or brings the goals alive, shows evidence of those values in action. One thing that's interesting that we've observed over the last 6 months, and it kind of goes to something Eva mentioned, it's in a similar vein. We were asked to develop podcast functionality on our platform. And the reason we were asked to develop it, and it makes total sense, when somebody listens to a podcast, and it's the whole radio concept you talked about, Eva, is very similar. Especially if you're listening on your own time, a lot of the time you're dropping into a conversation. And some of the things you spoke about that Kuehne Nagel did over the previous years, you allow people to drop into a conversation with leaders or with people across the organization. And that's a very powerful way of having people connect into that conversation. There's a lot of research that shows that employees are much more likely to buy in completely to the values of the organization, the goals of the organization, if a leader sits down one-on-one with them and explains and gives them the detail of, here's what we're trying to achieve, here's what we're thinking about, this is what we're excited about, this is what we're worried about. Sitting down one-on-one with every employee is a noble aspiration, I guess, right? But it's not always practical if you've got an organization of 100 people or 100,000 people. Podcasts are a very effective way of almost achieving the same thing, where if a leader is having a fireside conversation with somebody and talking about where he wants to take the organization, if an employee listens to that conversation internally, when they're out walking the dog in the evening or something, they're essentially dropping in on a conversation, and it's shown to be a very effective way of having that one-on-one conversation at scale. Recognition, and again, Eva, I think you've actually, if I analyze the stuff you've done, you've covered an awful lot of these things in your approach at Kuehne Nagel. But recognition, lack of recognition, is research shown to be one of the biggest reasons people become disengaged. And the converse is also true. If you build a culture of recognition, then people are much more likely to be engaged, they're much more likely to be committed. So when we're communicating, and again, regardless of what you're using as a technology or a communication platform, think about increasing the amount of recognition that you're publishing. Recognition has a huge amount of benefits in terms of, obviously, for the person that's recognized, but it's also letting people know what's happening in the organization. If you're congratulating somebody on a job well done on a particular initiative, you're also making the company aware of that initiative. And if those initiatives are related to the goals of the organization, even better. And it's a huge influencer on shaping your culture also. Community and belonging. Mentioned at the start, employee sense of belonging is the new holy grail. This is where a lot of the battles are going to be fought in terms of hearts and minds for people. In every organization, there are natural communities. In an organization of 100 people, you'll have natural communities, micro communities. In an organization of 1,000 people, you'll have more natural communities. The more that you can facilitate those communities, the more you will deliberately influence the sense of belonging that people have in the organization. So it's something to consider in any framework that you build. This is kind of a pretty basic one, right? But it's sometimes when we overlook. Informed. When we talk sometimes about people's emotional commitment to an organization, and one of the big measurements is almost they act like an owner. Like, we'd love if everybody acted like an owner. What are the things that influence people acting like an owner? The two biggest influences of acting like an owner are feeling informed and feeling empowered, right? So feeling empowered, I'm not going to talk about, but feeling informed is within our control as people that are responsible for communication. And it's not feeling informed about there's a meeting later on, or it's feeling informed about the bigger things that are happening in the organization. Are we being very deliberate about ensuring that everybody genuinely knows what's going on in the organization? Because if we are, and people feel informed, they're much more likely to have an emotional commitment to the organization. They're much more likely to feel that sense of ownership. Community-led comms. This is something obviously we really believe in. It's trusting your organization. We're all living in the social media world where the Taoiseach of the country can put something out on social, people can interact with it. You're really putting yourself out there. And there's an expectation with, I suppose, the new generation of employees that transparency exists, that access to leaders exists, and that takes a leap of faith. One of the things we always get asked from people that are about to deploy our platform is, what if somebody says this on the platform, or what if? And there's an element of you need to trust your organization. That transparency delivers trust, which increases the social capital. And it can't just be about top down. Communication needs to come from everybody. Just in terms of building trust, and this is, again, I'm going to point back to Eva on this one as well. Like, trust is built by many things. One of the key things that builds trust is authenticity and a human element. So we've seen, like, things like podcasts are very, people are dropping into a conversation, it's very human, but also very basic things like employee spotlights. Like, we're on Zoom calls all day long, but you don't get to know your colleagues. You could be on 10 Zoom calls with a colleague and not get to know them. And we've seen just very simple employee spotlights where you're focusing on a colleague. It shouldn't be a leader in the organization. It should be somebody from your logistics team, your warehouse team. What are they into? What are their hobbies? What's their family? What's their secret vice? What are they into? Celine Dion, like Eva mentioned. And it allows people to get to know who they're working with. And that's very important when it comes to trust. Knowing that having that familiarity builds trust. And also just the human element, right? We've seen more and more leaders just jump on a live stream to the organization, post a video. the less produced it is, the more effective it is. It's more authentic. Measure. I'm not going to talk about, I think this is a basic. You need to, ideally you need to be measuring the effectiveness of your communication. Eva, you've evolved the approach you've taken over the years. You need to be measuring the impact. You need to understand the impact and respond accordingly. Just some things to avoid. For me, make sure it's not all top down. Ideally, it's two-way, engaging communications. Transactional, avoid being overly transactional. Instant messaging and hyperactive messaging it feels like communication, but it's actually, it's allowing work to get done. But where it becomes too much, then it's actually destroying social capital, which is something we need to be very aware of. And make sure that things don't need to be overproduced. Where it's more human, where it's more authentic, it has a much greater chance of increasing the social capital. Last thing for me is just a recap. Employee experience is not about, it's not about a battle of, one-upmanship on perks. It's a battle for the emotional commitment to the organization. What we need to be conscious of is it's a battle for hearts and minds. So that's it. Thank you very much. Hopefully that was helpful.
That's brilliant. John, thank you very much for that. Lots of really good takeaways there. I think if it's all right with both of you, we'll get straight into the questions. We have questions coming in from everywhere and every sort of tool. So I think to start, even Nikki asks, just at the start of your presentation, you spoke about somebody that came in, I think, to support the leadership team. Who was that person that you brought in?
Oh, for our TED Talk event. Yeah, we brought in the presenter, Michael Common.
Okay.
Michael Common, yeah, and he delivers a number of kind of leadership training workshops as well, and a huge amount around communication. And he's actually really, really smart in the communication space. So yeah, he's who we'd reached out to, and we had actually used Michael before for a mentor training program where we brought all of our mentors within the business through, how to mentor effectively. So we were familiar with him beforehand, but yeah, we brought him in to teach us how to tell a story and to give a speech.
Brilliant, that's great. And Maura asks, just in terms of the technicality of the practice itself, she asks, was it live or recorded? It was a live event, right?
It was live, yeah. So we were on Zoom from 10 to 10 until about 5:15.
Okay, brilliant, appreciate that. Karen asks, well, perhaps a question for both of you. We'll start with you, John, right? And Karen is worried about turnover post-pandemic. And what may happen there. And it seems to Karen that people are confusing boredom with being stuck in a room and trying to work with boredom with the company itself. Have you any thoughts around that piece?
Yeah, no, I think it's very real, right? The last 12 months, last 6 months in particular have been very challenging for people. And there is a real danger. There is a real danger that people will look for something different because life has been more one-dimensional than we're used to, and there's a real danger that people will confuse that with, I'm not happy with my role, and that's a genuine challenge. I think HR practitioners, leaders in organizations, I think all we can do is attempt to do the right thing and not scattergun our approach, right? I think it's just, again, for me, it's been very focused, very deliberate about understanding the things that matter in terms of having the right level of social capital in the organization, understanding the things that destroy it, like simple things like, having Zoom meetings all day with no break in between. Like we have a rule now where and a lot of organizations are doing it. I know it's like have 50-minute meetings rather than an hour, have 25-minute meetings rather than half an hour, but don't start them on the hour, start them at 5 past the hour or 10 past the hour, and just give people those breaks. We've done, no Zoom meeting Fridays and all that kind of stuff. I think those things are helpful, but not as random things. I think, we can all get ideas and do random stuff, but for me, it has to be very deliberate. It has to be, you have to understand, okay, I'm doing this because I want to make sure we don't deplete the social capital. We don't, get people burnt out. I'm doing this for the reverse, to increase the social capital, build the familiarity. And I think it's just being very deliberate then about, okay, what are the drivers that give me the best chance of people retaining that emotional commitment to the organization? And if I do the things that give me the best chance of driving that emotional commitment, then I put myself in the best chance of keeping people. You're never, it's humans at the end of the day, right? So it's not machines we're dealing with. So people will make their own decisions. But I think you need to put yourself in the best possible position by being deliberate about the things that you do to affect it.
Brilliant, John. Eva, any thoughts around that particular chat?
Yeah, and look, I suppose John talked a bit around it in his own presentation as well, really around, people's connection to the overall goals of the overall strategy, and feeling like they're a part of it, and we're all connected and working towards the same goals. And I think that's been really important. It's been a challenge, absolutely, for people working remotely, particularly people that might not necessarily be part of a team. We've been quite conscious of, if there's kind of individual contributors within the organization who wouldn't have the same kind of team connection, maybe that, myself with my HR team might be having on a weekly basis, outside of, I suppose, our weekly meeting and connection. We will arrange, the odd kind of lunchtime where we'll say we'll go on Zoom and eat lunch together and just have a chat where it's nothing about work and just see how we're getting on. So it is important to kind of make sure we're reconnecting with all of those people within the organization kind of in a similar way as well. But really, I suppose, realigning that piece that we're all kind of working together and taking those times or those opportunities to celebrate when we're achieving something together, and making sure that we can kind of reconnect in that way. They're pretty startling stats that John went through, like 1 in 2 people saying they enjoy their job less in the kind of current climate is, a frightening statistic in itself. So really it's around kind of how we can realign to the overall goal, I suppose reaffirm kind of why they're doing what they're doing, and I suppose bring back that kind of excitement into what they're doing, and everything that John went through will play a role in that, through recognition, through that communication piece.
Brilliant, Eva. Yeah, it's so important to use a framework and then show under that framework, show some evolution of practice. So it's seen as sort of stimulus as well, I think is really important. One common challenge we see amongst workplaces is when you might have some people who are office based. So I know maybe this is more relevant pre-pandemic, and then some who are on the road and more dispersed. Any thoughts? We'll start with you first, John. Any thoughts around what to do around communication when you have a dispersed skill set, if you like, people working from different locations?
Yeah, I suppose we probably don't see them in a different way, Cathal, right? Yeah. So I think anything that I've talked about, or any framework we think about the entire organization. We don't, I think because, we've all gone remote, then it almost offers an advantage in a way where the playing field has been leveled, right? So if somebody's on the road, we're all in the digital world now. So if somebody's on the road, they're actually, they should be receiving, they should be able to contribute to the conversation, to the communication. They should be able to engage with it as much as somebody in the office. And so I think a lot of it will be mobile. It'll be, but I think it'll be across the organization. One thing that we actually interestingly observed just before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of work with customers on the west coast of the US, and we saw that they were joining meetings on Zoom. Everybody was joining the meeting on Zoom, even though they were all in the office. And it was, so the meetings had a kind of digital identity more than a physical identity. And these were people that were literally maybe 50 meters from each other, or it might be in a campus with different buildings. And I think that's going to continue. It was already started. And I think even when we go back to the office or there's a hybrid, I think we're now at a point where every meeting is going to have a digital identity, and I think that's good. It levels the playing field for people that are not at corporate or not at HQ.
Brilliant, John. Yeah, and yourself, Eva. I know we've different skill sets, different locations. Any challenges around getting people involved?
Yeah, there's certainly challenges for us. Probably in particular, looking at maybe our kind of implant or operational key account roles that I mentioned sit on our customer sites. That might not necessarily be sitting on our networks, kind of standard, Monday to Friday, and may not have the same kind of exposure to the communications that we're rolling out on a daily basis. So we actually have an internal communication platform. It's a global platform, but we all have a community within that. So it's kind of like an internal Facebook page. And we have an Ireland community. I have a talent and development sub community off of that. And all of our employees have access to that, and we'll share communications through that. But it's also being conscious every time we are communicating anything like that, there's potentially people that aren't currently on the network or won't have access to that today. Some of our warehouse teams that won't have access to that today. So it's making sure that we're cascading that to them as well, and making sure that we're giving them all of that information, making sure that we're considering them in all of those events. So even the likes of our radio show event, we went straight to IT and said, look, how can we share this or play this within the warehouse so the warehouse teams can listen. So it's always a consideration to make sure that we are looking at every avenue for everybody through all of those challenges to make sure that everyone feels connected, because it can be quite easy, I think, within industries like that, where there is a little bit of kind of a segmented area of the business that might not be as integrated, to feel kind of left out or feel a bit isolated from the rest of the business. So it's really important to consider them in all of those aspects.
Brilliant, Eva. And I'll stick with you for the next one, if that's okay. Taking note of the fun element, right, to the practice, and the fun element to the approach. Did you experience much resistance to that element of it, maybe among senior leadership team? If you did, how do you come at that particular problem?
Not at all, quite the opposite. Our senior management team were nearly driving the fun element, and they were, anyone who wasn't kind of on the call or speaking at the time was very much driving that through the chat function as well, and having a lot of fun with everybody. So it wasn't a challenge for us at all, and I think they all saw the opportunity within it as well to reconnect with everybody. And I mean, we while we gave kind of topics to everybody in advance of the show, we didn't give them any questions or any preparation, not to torture them in advance of it and scare the life out of them, but really it was around, we wanted those conversations to be completely authentic and natural and just evolve as they happen. And we really wanted them to be honest. We didn't want to shy away from any topics. I mean, even in the likes of our future of work conversation, we were saying, if we went to a 4-day week, would you like a 4-day week? Would you like to work from home the whole time? Or, we didn't shy away from any topics. We left it open to the room because we wanted that feedback, and we wanted it to be a natural conversation that evolved itself. Yeah, it was great fun. Brilliant.
And there's a lot more Celine Dion fans out there than we
I don't think there's any Celine Dion that I encounter.
John, similar topic to you, John. So if for HR people on the call, and they're looking to convince the business, the senior team around we need a new approach to how we've traditionally done communication. What sort of, is there a tip sheet there, or is there particular buttons they need to go to kind of have that conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question, Carl. I think people are recognizing, I think there's a natural recognition of the challenge that's going to face us now, right? When with this, disability for people, as soon as it happens, right, the first person leaves and they're still living in whatever part of the country they're living in, they don't need to move, and they start a new job on a Monday. I think the penny is going to drop on that, as organizations see it happening, and that friction has been completely eroded. So I think that is going to make the business case for it. I think it's going to be very visible, right? So it's not something that is a hypothetical. We're going to start seeing it happening if it isn't already, and I think that's going to make the business case in itself. So for me, I don't think it'll need a lot of convincing. I think people instinctively feel it, right? The thing with the pandemic, and this has been a shared experience for the world, right? So it's not a challenge that's particular to any one organization or even one country. And there's a lot of, the collective thinking, and I think people it's instinctively, I think people know that this is a challenge that needs to be solved.
Great. And John, we'll stick with you. Helen Gallagher is, I think, sharing a fear that perhaps is out there amongst many, which is this fear of post-vaccine. Part of our business will be return to work. Part of our business won't be. How do we avoid a two-tier culture, if you like?
Yeah, no, it's a great. Actually, Helen was our very first customer in Morgan McKinley, so shout out to Helen there. Yeah, for me, I genuinely think there'll be less of a two-tier culture because of the digital footprint. I think, like, even internally in Workvivo, we're doing a town hall meeting for the whole company now every week, and we have been doing for quite a while. But if we had to do that in the physical world, I don't know where we'd fit everybody, right? And the logistics behind it would be prohibitive in terms of doing it as frequently. And I think the digital world just allows us to do a lot of things that are very effective that we couldn't do. We've some of our more junior people, we invite them to present every week, and it's very, very effective. I think there's every chance there'll be less of a split. I think, like, some of the things we're thinking about as challenges are, how do we facilitate the spontaneous collisions that happened in the office that won't happen where there's a hybrid model, and those spontaneous collisions where you bump into somebody, you have a 2-minute conversation about something that's happening. That's an unsolved problem right now, because we're all, we're planning our Zoom calls. We know who we're going to speak to during the day, and we need to figure out how to reintroduce those spontaneous collisions as well in the hybrid world. So,
brilliant, John. We've time for probably a couple of more questions, if that's all right. So Eva, in a time where there's too much information out there, how do we reduce volume and increase relevance, or even the Kuehne Nagel approach around what we communicate? So there's a fear around there's too much communication out there. How do we ensure we're more relevant and we're not overloading people, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think you need to be really strategic about it. You need to kind of plan it out in terms of those internal communications. My colleague Lauren sends out an internal communication on a weekly basis every Wednesday, kind of highlighting a couple of communications that have come through that My KN page that I'd mentioned, and kind of various things that are going on in the business. And she'd be very strategic around what we're sharing which week. I'd have a talent and development segment once a month. My colleague in HR would have a segment around kind of career opportunities and roles that we're hiring for. And it's really around, I suppose, creating a communication plan where we're keeping people informed and giving them the information that they need, but also being a bit more strategic about it. It absolutely can be, I think, a saturated environment where there's so much going on. Our NM actually opened up a few seminars recently for like an Ask Me Anything, and it was literally any topic, anything you want to know. Do you want to know about our business growth, where we see ourselves going? Do you want to know about my own next steps for my own career? Do you want to know my favorite breakfast cereal? It was literally any question and anything. So we're kind of using, I suppose, those opportunities to get a bit more information and find out what people are interested in and what their concerns are within the business. Are they wondering, I suppose, in terms of our strategy, if it's aligned, or if we're realigning that in terms of how things have been shaped over the last number of years. Are we looking at a more flexible approach to working going forward? Is there any information around kind of what's happening down the line? So I think events like that will give us an opportunity to get an understanding of how people are feeling and what they want to know, and that information, and we can use that, I think, to shape our strategy then going forward as well.
And all the time we're getting to know each other better, and as a senior team we're not shying away from any difficult topics as well, which fuels the whole piece. John, any final thoughts just on that particular topic?
No, just I think that was an interesting point you made there, Eva. Like, we would consider those in terms of a content calendar, and like what you spoke about, we would phrase as a content calendar, and then being very deliberate about what that content calendar looks like, and making sure you've been thoughtful and considerate about what you're trying to achieve with that. So no, I would agree with that.
Eva, John, thank you very much for not just joining us today, but the prep you do in advance. And I know it takes a lot of time out of your busy lives. So there's lots of good takeaways and stimulus there. And I think some good questions that came in as well, which always tells us that hopefully some points landed as well. Which is, I got my own lesson in communication by coaching 6 and 7-year-olds how to play hurling. Yeah, clearly I have a lot to learn. But I want to thank you both for your time, for joining us today, and to everyone that joined us on the call. Really appreciate you taking the time. Keep an eye out for the follow-up, and subscribe to the Red Cube podcast. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.